Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for inviting me to speak at the Scottish Summit 2021. I'm just deeply grateful to the organisers for giving so much time and commitment to what is an amazing topic, the topic that I will speak to you about for the next 45 minutes, accessibility. Thank you so much to the sponsors for making this event happen: Scriptrunner, DQ, Proximo, RedSpire, Agilysys, and Hitachi Solutions. Obviously, these events don't happen unless people really kind of make the effort to not just obviously spend the money on getting these events happening, but also, really help run the events themselves. So thank you so much for doing that. My name is Hector Minto. I'm the accessibility evangelist, which is maybe a term you've not heard so many times before, for Microsoft in EMEA. And my role is essentially to build confidence, honestly, confidence, energy, muscle, to talk about disability inclusion in today's modern society. This is a topic that's been around for some time, but often it's been thought of as something of a regulatory piece. And I'm hoping within the next 40 minutes or so, and with some active Q&A, this is live, I'm hoping that what we can do is we can start to drive a conversation about the opportunity for you as a community, you, the builders of modern society, to really get ambitious about including people with disabilities and see how actually easy, that's a terrible word to use in the tech world, but how easy it can increasingly be to have this mindset of inclusion. We are a connected society. Now, what does that mean? It's quite a flippant term, but the way I would term that with a disability lens is that obviously we rely on tech just to be included in education, in the workplace, access government services, access anything in life. Honestly, the first option nowadays is probably to go digitally. And if you're somebody with a disability who's excluded from the design of that very fabric of society, it leads to some pretty horrifying outcomes. So governments are hugely aware that as society digitally transforms, we've got to make sure that we actually include more people, because it's extremely expensive to leave people behind. It leads to poor societal outcomes. It leads to outcomes that you might not have thought about. 50% of the prison population are functionally illiterate. Now, have a think about that for a moment. Why does that happen? Well, it happens because you're excluded and you find a different route. So this is a really, we take this responsibility incredibly seriously at Microsoft, but just regulating your way out of a problem, we also know, is not the way forward on this. It is part of the picture and will always be part of the picture. The UK government, I know this is an incredibly global audience, do remember you can follow these live captions in the link in the chat in up to 65 different languages all at the same time. They won't always be 100% accurate, but test them out. Let me know what you think. So governments are looking at accessibility now, and they're recognizing this need to enforce it through the public sector. My message to any of you who are looking at that happening in the public sector should be, this is going to go wider, and is already going wider in other markets around the world. In certain countries, they're looking at companies with a turnover over a certain value, and then putting the same regulations they're putting on the public sector into the private sector. As I said, it's not just a regulatory picture that we're going to talk about today. I would always start with any conversation around accessibility that you just understand that this is access to work, school, and life. Work is increasingly digital. What was that figure I heard in the earlier keynote? 30% of the jobs in Denver are digital jobs. Access to school, staying in education, but also access to daily life. And disability covers some of the more obvious things that you might have considered before attending this talk: vision, hearing, mobility. Maybe some of you are already thinking about learning difference or learning disabilities. But what we're also starting to see is that this is extending to neurodiversity, cognitive difference, and mental health. So this is an incredibly important topic. I guarantee you everybody listening to this call knows somebody with some form of disability. This is 1 in 6 of the general population. Here's the design challenge. For years, all through my career, I've only worked in disability tech. we always started with the diagnosis of the individual. I would go out with medical professionals to assess people for their technology, and they would always start with, this person has motor neuron disease. This person has cerebral palsy. And I would always be the first to come back to them and say, but what is it you want me to do? Yeah, what do you want me to, in inverted commas, solve here? What problem are you asking me to fix? Yeah, and the fix was never the person. The fix was the access method, the technology themselves, the technology that we were using. So whenever you start talking about disability in any organization that you're working with or any client that you're working for, focus them on your role as being the designer. Disability is a mismatch in human interaction. You can either be designed into an experience or you can be designed out of an experience. Just by adding these captions to this morning, standard in PowerPoint, we are designing more people in to this event. We're designing more people into this session. And it's a deliberate process. You have to turn these things on. You have to enable these technologies. So on the responsibility side, we know that accessibility is a responsibility, and Microsoft's been doing this a long time. 1 billion people on the planet with a disability, only 1 in 10 getting access to the products they need. The one that's pretty terrifying here, double the unemployment rate for people with disabilities consistently around the world. People with disabilities are excluded from the workforce. People stay in education, and then we see this dip. And that's a lot to do with the accessibility of the workspace. It's also worth noting at this point that disability, when we describe it, is permanent, temporary, and situational. Some of us can be disabled for a short period of time through an injury, like a broken arm. Some of us might be disabled by a situation that we find ourselves in. And obviously, when we think about the design challenge there, if you design for people with permanent disabilities, you're also designing for the much wider group of people who will be able to use the systems you're building. Now, on that responsibility, we can't talk about that at this time without talking about the impact of the global pandemic on people with disabilities. What we know is that 1 in 5 workers with disabilities have lost their jobs. And the one that I think is interesting from a kind of an inclusion design principle, as people have looked to homeschooling, 35% of special needs children, whether you like that term or not, this is from the headlines that we use, or kids in special education facilities, are doing little to no remote learning. People weren't ready to include the kids with disabilities as the global pandemic struck. Now think about the workforce for a moment. How ready were businesses to cater for their employees with disabilities in a remote learning environment? And what we know is that the companies who were more engaged in the accessibility conversation were the most resilient in terms of maintaining their employees through this period. But moving to the opportunity, accessibility is also an amazing diversity and inclusion conversation. People often look at the D&I agenda and don't talk about disability. But actually, the companies who invest in making sure that they bring disability talent into their organizations and build a culture of inclusion around disability are actually delivering better performance, better economic performance. I can link you, or we can link you to this Accenture study, the Disability Inclusion Advantage, where they've done the research. So if you're trying to convince people to pay you or engage you to help with accessibility, the very fabric of the organization, the digital fabric of the organizations you work in, don't just focus them on the obligation, the regulation picture. I would really encourage you to get them thinking about the opportunity here and what might come out of this engagement. Things like the Xbox Adaptive Controller. Now, if you've not seen this before, this is essentially the same cost as any other Xbox controller, but you can plug switches into it to allow people with physical disabilities to build their own controller. That could be head switches for left and right while in Forza. It could be blowing through a straw for the jumps in Mario. Yeah, whatever you're doing, you build your own rig. But the beauty of this product that came out of a hack at Microsoft is not just the impact it had on people with disabilities, but it's the impact it had on Microsoft's culture. We started building specialist assistive technology for the first time. And this is super exciting to measure the impact this has had on how people view working at Microsoft and the sort of company that we are. We want to empower every person and every organization on the planet to achieve more, but actually we've got to kind of do it and live it. And that's part of the experience that I've been living over the last 5 years. So I joined 5 years ago, but Microsoft's been talking about accessibility for a long time, going all the way back to Bill Gates in 1997, talking about trusted computing. And we've had various investments through the years. The first Ability Summit started in 2011, where we really proactively started engaging externally as well with the community, with the disability community. That had 80 people turn up to that event in 2011. We're doing it again this May, and we expect 20,000 people to come and talk to us about disability and technology, but also Microsoft as an employer of people with disabilities. That should give you some sense of how this is ramping up. I joined in 2016 as part of this new cultural approach to accessibility, essentially bringing subject matter experts on disability and tech into the business, and then proactively driving this confidence around disability and tech through the business. We created the role of a Chief Accessibility Officer some time ago, but for the first time ever, we now have a Chief Accessibility Officer with a lived experience of disability, driving both the cultural change and the technical change through the organization. Having a CAO in place allows different parts of the organizations to make commitments to Microsoft, to our accessibility ambition, whether it's through HR, bringing more people with disabilities in, whether it's marketing and representation of disability in all of the marketing that we do, and the accessibility of our websites globally. And of course, whether it's engineering and sales, in terms of how do we engage with the technical world around us to drive the opportunity of digital inclusion. We work it like a business. What that means is that we measure, and we measure change. And we give everybody across the business, whether they are in HR or in sales or any other part of the business, we sit down with them on accessibility and disability. They're different things. And we ask them to create this 5-year maturity model. We let them see where they're going to be in a few years' time, but we make sure that we're really setting down the steps for that 5-year journey to get there. And these are the pillars that sit within our accessibility team at Microsoft. These are where we measure ourselves as having impact on the business. Culture. Are we deliberately going after a culture where people talk positively about disability, as saying that employees with disabilities are talent that we need within the organization? And are we building confidence for more people within Microsoft to talk about their own disabilities? It's also worth noting at this point that 70% of disability is hidden. 75% of people with dyslexia do not tell their employer. The 1 in 12 people who are colorblind don't really feel they should be talking about it in the workplace. The aging population who are acquiring hearing loss or vision loss are hiding it often. And so obviously what we want to do is we want to make it sure that people see that there is benefit to talking about disability within Microsoft, and also benefit in terms of signposting to the tools to be more productive and more successful. But what's been interesting as part of that cultural journey is that then people start talking about systems. I can't book my leave. I can't attend this event. This starts to come out, and then we start looking at our own systems because we're talking about disability. And then the more disability talent that we have within an organization, it starts to show up in our products. Of course it would. More people with disabilities confidently talking about disability in an organization means that you think about what's it like to be a customer of this company. And I would encourage you to all to think about that for your own organizations. You know, when you start talking about disability internally, it's much easier to start talking about the impact you have on the society externally. And then, of course, the beautiful bit, which I'm sure you're all particularly excited about, which is the future. Innovation is what drives a company like Microsoft, but innovation with purpose is even more exciting. So let's dig into some of these. As I've mentioned the mission statement already, but you know, this really matters. Every person is every person with a disability, and we have the direct executive sponsorship of Satya Nadella on accessibility. He loves this topic. He talks about it all the time. He speaks at the Ability Summit every year. And we're really grateful that he drives us forward and has ambition for us, but clearly also budgets for this work. Disability is a strength. You've heard me say it already. Every single person on this slide is somebody who impacts Microsoft's products on a daily basis. What we're also then doing is driving out a critical mass of knowledge. So in terms of the culture and then moving into the processes, we want to make it easy for people to talk about disability. I always say to people that they lose their inner child. You know, when you were an 8-year-old, trust me, you asked your parents questions about disability. Why can that person not do that? Why does he look like that? Is the sort of thing that kids say. But we lose some of this inquisitiveness as we become adults because maybe we feel awkward and we're not close to the topic. Building knowledge, a bedrock of knowledge through the organization is also something that we measure within Microsoft. Every employee of Microsoft gets to take this Accessibility in Action badge. And you can all take a very similar badge on MS Learn. And I would really encourage you to do that. It's a qualification in disability etiquette, all the way through to disability tech, and then all the way down into how to build accessible experiences in technology. And that should be seen as something that goes on your CV or your resume, depending on which country you're in. And you say, I am a person who wants to build accessible technology. I am a person who has a value set around inclusion. So I would really encourage you to go and take that. But again, on our processes, what we also see is that it makes us think about how we're delivering to customers at large. How many of you knew that we had a disability answer desk, a global disability answer desk, where any citizen with disabilities anywhere in the world can come to us for technical support on Microsoft products? Any organization, large or small, can come through to our enterprise disability answer desk and get help with deploying Microsoft's accessibility tools or getting conformance statements on how accessible our products are. This is a critical process, and this information needs to be front and center increasingly as our sales teams go out and engage with customers around the world, but also as independent developers even go and talk to your clients, leverage this service. If you're building technology, but you hear of people who are blind or who have low vision, people who are deaf using your products, and you're looking for support, you can send them through to our Enterprise Disability Answer Desk and they will give advice on how people use our technology. So moving to the product, I just wanted to share with you some trends that we're seeing. And the first one you might hear regularly, but it's always worth repeating: inclusive design. When you design for disability, increasingly you just design for everybody. Everyone knows that a physical ramp up to a building doesn't just help wheelchair users, but it helps people with trolleys delivering stuff. If people bring their kids to work, the prams can, or the strollers can also go up the ramps. This is just the most basic example of inclusive design, but it sits within digital as well. From everything from ease of access through pointers and fonts. I have a bright yellow cursor on my screen right now. This really helps when I'm screen sharing at the moment, and it's a standard setting in Windows 10 to make your cursor massive, put some colored beacons above your text cursor, and change its color. You know, this just helps everybody see something in a better way, but it starts in disability. It came for disability first. But the more people that know about it, the more they will start to use these features for other situations, for other scenarios. How many of you know how to magnify in Windows? Hit your Windows key and plus, zoom into your entire screen is amazing when you're screen sharing and showing people some of your designs. Yep, this is a simple tool that everybody should know about, but probably learn about it first when you start learning about disability and inclusion. So inclusive design, recognize an exclusion, solve for that exclusion, but then think about all of the other people that will benefit from it. Another easy, simple example is in the Edge browser, you have something called reading mode. Here's the Scottish Summit website. I've highlighted my text, right click, open in the immersive reader, and I'm getting access to your website, but with reading support for dyslexia built right into your browser. It doesn't just give line focus, spacing of words, Erlang colors for disability, but it also gives these symbols where appropriate to help people understand. It started with dyslexia. We're now seeing it embedded in job centers for people with language difference or different reading abilities. And this is available, let me just move on, in Azure. The immersive reader is something that we designed for dyslexia, specifically for dyslexia. We put it into OneNote, we put it into Edge, we put it into Office 365. You'll find it everywhere that you look now. Suddenly, educational technology providers started putting it in their software, but it's available to all of you on Azure, wherever you're building any kind of product for people who read differently. And trust me, citizens across the world have different reading abilities. Right here in the UK, the average reading age is 9 years old. We have the opportunity as builders now to put these tools right into our products at the point of, a point of delivery. Hit a button and say, reading help, there, straight away. Okay, so this is our ambition with accessibility. We look at our products, we put them on our platforms, and we ask all of you as developers to start thinking about, could you also start to leverage some of these services to build more inclusive experiences? Trend 2, confidence and visibility, greater visibility. Being brave about putting accessibility front and center. This is a really interesting journey that Microsoft's been on. Oh, let me, I copied a slide, I'm sorry. This is the accessibility checker in Office. Now, if you've never checked a document for accessibility, that's probably your first step of the journey. Go to your last email that you sent, open it up, review, check accessibility. And what you'll find is that your footer has a load of messages, a load of icons on it that just would make no sense to a blind person. They have no descriptions. You might find that you've got poor color contrast. It will tell you all of this directly in Office 365. In fact, older versions of Office. But the difference in the latest products is that it's now there front and center right next to the spell checker. Now, this is a design decision. Years ago, Microsoft put this in File, Inspect Document, and then check for accessibility. The modern Microsoft says, no, that gets taskbar. That gets full frontal menu visibility, because that's critical, not just to our users, but to our brand. We want to show everybody that this is here and that we expect people to know that there's disability support built right into our products. Changing that button meant that the global use of that feature went up 5x, 500%, just from changing the button position. But we have so much further to go. And so what we're also starting to do on this now is we're starting to signpost for accessibility. All of you can put in mail tips in Outlook an option that says, I prefer inclusive content. I prefer inclusive content is not, I have a disability. It's just, I prefer inclusive content. And what it does is it triggers everybody else to check the accessibility of that before they send it to you. It's an amazing bit of, just as I say, just a bit of signposting to get people to think about, are we being inclusive on a daily basis? Could we be? And if you're working with projects for, say, public sector, where there are regulations about being accessible, you can turn that on and say, part of this, everybody, is that we expect this to be accessible. I loved that at Scottish Summit this year, in the prep for all the presenters, right there in that front slide, it was, hey, can you also check your decks for accessibility before we share them? Yeah, that's signposting. That's what we're trying to look for. And this is available in the Power Platform as well. I was just watching an amazing session earlier on how to watch this. I think you can watch it again later. It was on this morning about how to build inclusive Power Apps. The accessibility checker that we have in Office is also there in the Power Platform. So you have the opportunity to routinely check for accessibility as you move through building your Power Apps. As I say, that's a mindset. It's just about you wanting to do this. Okay. The other thing in terms of visibility of accessibility solutions, another example might be in Stream. So every Teams meeting gets recorded and then pushed up into Microsoft Stream, but that's where we generate an auto transcript. Same as we're seeing the captions here, the captions are really visible there in Stream. They're a major part of the product. They're an important part of the product. It also means that it's fully searchable. Every time I go to see a customer, if I'm going to see Barclays Bank, I'll type in Barclays in Stream and I'll find out all the people in my organization who've been talking about Barclays Bank and go straight to the bit where they were talking about them. And then I can hear what's the latest that people are talking about. This drives my own personal productivity. But it also means that people who are looking to deliver accessibly are finding it much easier to find where to get the captions file. It's just there in Office 365. Trend 3, reimagine existing tools with AI. I heard this earlier in one of the keynotes that this is coming, to you harder and faster. Cognitive services are a massive thing for disability. If technology can see, can hear, can speak, can think, could we reimagine using that as a bridge to support people with disabilities to use our products? We're doing it ourselves at Microsoft. That pointer and font's going to keep coming up. Every time you put a photo into Office 365, we use computer vision, machine learning, to put a description in behind that picture for people with disabilities, for people who are blind. Somebody's screen reader, if they're listening to that document instead of seeing it, they will get that spoken description of that picture. This is now getting to almost human parity, is what they're telling us. Now, what that means is human parity in terms of what's in the picture, but your meaning when you put a photo into something could be something completely different, right? So it's always important that you change it to make sure you're getting the meaning across. But we have labeled over 1 billion photos in Office 365 for people who are blind in the back end. Yeah, it's just been happening for people. So that's us reimagining and using our own cognitive services in Office to impact the lives of people with disabilities. The next one is empathy in design. Employ disability talent. Now, the point here is about lived experience and perspective. For years, we used to design products for people with disabilities. That's not just Microsoft, that's the tech industry more globally. You always designed around the regulation and making sure you were designing for this group of people who needed that extra design. The more that you drive your own representation in your organizations, what we actually start to see is that you just get better design. And I can think of no better example than the blur in Teams and the captions in Teams. Okay, the blurred background was designed by somebody called Swetha. Hopefully that's going to play. I'm just going back. If that's not going to play, I'll have to describe it. Okay, so the blurred background was designed, I'm sure you've all tried it in Teams, you click blurred background and it takes out all of this background information. But it came from somebody with a lived experience of lip reading. Somebody who was saying, I find it very difficult to follow along, especially with so many faces on a screen. Can we do something about making this visually simpler for me? And that, working with the Teams team, that then led to the creation of the blur. But because they got to know Swetha, what it also led to was when they were putting the captions into Microsoft Teams, in PowerPoint, the person in charge of the presentation turns the captions on for everybody. I turn these captions on to help. But the lived experience of people with disabilities is that constantly asking for accommodation is really difficult. It's a hard experience. The together mode that you now see for blurred background on everyone makes it easy to lip read in a whole audience. Turning captions on personally in Teams and not letting anybody else know that you've turned those captions on means that people with disabilities can now turn that on, be included in the meeting, but not have to keep explaining it to their colleagues. And this is empathetic design. It's actually people with disabilities saying what they want, not what we think they want. That's a really, really important trend that we're starting to also see. And then the last one I would say is extend accessibility. I mentioned it earlier. When we talk about disability, my PowerPoint live. I think this is to do with Present Live, actually. This GIF's not working for me. Don't just think about vision and hearing and all of these other things. Do think about things like color blindness. There's a setting in Windows now where you can just turn on a color filter. So if you're looking at a red-green scorecard, or it's the rugby this weekend, if you're watching Wales versus Ireland, maybe it's that this weekend, and the red team are playing the green team on the red pitch, or sorry, on the green pitch, you can turn on literally a color filter in Windows 10 and that whole thing pops for you visibly. That's just built in to Windows, but people don't know about it. So I would invite you to ask people to think about the wider conversation about disability, and that includes mental health. I thought it was amazing to watch earlier in the kickoff for the Scottish Summit. We took a moment to think about our mental health. It's now built into our Microsoft products. Insights allows you to look at how much you're working, how many meetings you're having outside of hours. It allows you to set up quiet hours. It allows you to book focus time right there into Outlook. Again, this is happening because we're having a lively digital conversation about mental health in Microsoft and thinking about the impact our products have and also the impact our products can have as we move forward. So as you start to become like the accessibility experts in your organizations, widen your reach, because then what you'll do is you'll get more support for what you're trying to do for people who are blind or people with hearing loss when you start thinking about disabilities that impact the wider audience. I would really encourage you to get brave on having conversations around digital mental health, color blindness for the 1 in 12 males. Yeah, you'll start to get more buy-in to accessibility as you move it forward. And trend 6, democratise testing. Find new champions within your environment. Now think about this for a moment. We all get professionally protective about what we know. So if we become the accessibility expert and we can get paid to do great accessibility work and great accessibility testing, we might get impact for that one product. We might get that job. But do we drive more work in the future? And actually, do we allow others to do some of this testing? One of the most amazing experiences I've had in the last 5 years is I sat down with the CEO of a global business, one of the top businesses in the world, and I sat with them and I showed him how he could test his own website for accessibility. And he was fully engaged. He also happened to be the parent of a child with disabilities. He cared passionately about this topic. And he sat down and he looked at it and he said, I need to fix this. And I said, look, at any point, anybody within your team, your marketing lead, your HR lead, they can go and look at the tools that are being built within your organization, and they can go and test the software, the websites, the SharePoints. All of this can be tested by any individual in the same way that you can test your email or your documents with the accessibility checker. By doing so, he's now driving this more work on accessibility, more investment, and putting the budget to make sure this work happens within his organization. Democratizing testing is about sharing tools that pretty much anybody can use. And this is what we're trying to do with Accessibility Insights. We're open sourcing the way that we test. Think about this from the Power App perspective as well. The more people that are able to code and create technology, the more we need to put tools in their hands to check for accessibility. Yes, we've got the accessibility checker in the Power Platform, but what we need to then do is use a tool to test the entire thing, whether it's going out on Android, whether it's going out on Windows, whether it's being delivered over the web. We have open sourced these testing tools, aka.ms/accessibility insights. And you will be able to go and just run some automated tests that allow you to check for links, appropriate links, color contrasts, tab order or scan order within the software that you're using or the software that you're developing. Automated testing is not the same as human testing. Testing by humans, particularly testing by humans with disabilities, is even stronger. But just getting the testing tools into the hands of a wider audience, we think is having a really good impact on driving awareness and actually finding more champions and more supports for the agenda that we're trying to drive forward. What we're seeing is that accessibility is moving beyond the IT team and moving more into the HR teams, the D&I teams, the marketing teams. The comms teams are also a really good audience for accessibility. I love the companies who get their internal comms accessible and then start looking at their external comms. When you realize you've got colleagues with disabilities, that's the driver for the internal comms. Then we start to see commitments being made on the external comms. This, for many organizations, is their first experience of building an accessible experience. I should say that the regulations on accessibility are not just for web anymore. They are for the apps that we deliver and for the documents available, particularly in the public sector. Okay, moving forward. Let's talk about AI. I've mentioned it already. This is based on Microsoft's cognitive services typically, but it's not just the cognitive service, it's the data that AI is built on. So we're doing an awful lot of work on tackling the disability data desert within AI. So much of the AI that's being generated is not representative of the much wider group of people who use technology. So that's something we're proactively investing in and working on. But in terms of using Microsoft cognitive services, technology that can be more interactive using AI is exciting to us. So we have a program called AI for Accessibility. This is something you can all look at. For the latest RFP, it's focused on education. The one before that was transport. The whole point of the program is that we find exciting projects to invest in to really impact both the employment, the daily life, and the human communication of people with disabilities using Microsoft's artificial intelligence. What we're saying is, if you've got a project or an exciting idea or some research that you're doing where you're really building net new technology to drive positive impact for people with disabilities, we want to get behind it. Now, that might be Azure credit for some, for most, we would say. It might be actual consultancy from Microsoft's accessibility experts and accessibility team to really drive your project forward. And for the most amazing ideas, that might be investment. Think about seeing AI for a moment. In the photo here, you're seeing somebody using an app, which is available only on iOS at the moment, but it's something called Seeing AI. And that's there. It's been designed by the blind community within Microsoft to create an app that uses artificial intelligence to really impact the lives of people who are blind. Using Seeing AI, you can read handwriting for the first time. Using Seeing AI, you can read any text offline just by flashing your camera over the text. A letter pops in through your door, you can literally just flash your camera at it and it will read the text to you. It recognizes colors, it recognizes faces, it recognizes money. We're using cognitive services, computer vision, OCR, speech, to essentially build an app that allows people who are blind to live independently, to live more independently, to have less human support because we have an app that plugs a gap. That project has been amazing, and we have learned so many things about design for people who are blind that impacts the rest of our products, that informs our other teams about how to design UI, how to design interfaces. But it started with a research project. What can computer vision do for the blind community? What's really fascinating about that is that the technology they've discovered through that process can also be applied to other disabilities and to other industries. So the components that we've built within that app are actually incredibly interesting for a much wider group of people, but that was sparked by disability. This should not surprise us. We wouldn't be using emojis today unless, well, we might have been, but the very first symbol communication was used by people who couldn't speak and people with learning disabilities. Word prediction came from the speech market first. Home automation using tech came from the physical disability world first. We live in a world where tech that started in the disability space eventually impacted all of us. And so that's really my kind of call to action for you as a community, for you, the builders. That's who you are to me. You're the people who are building society. You're increasingly building a society out there. And years ago, construction workers would not have put ramps in. It wasn't in their mindset to actually build ramps. But then building codes came out and then they had to. But really, do people look at the building code anymore to know that you put a ramp on a public building? Honestly, I just think culturally we've got so used to this idea. It's become the normal design of buildings that we include people with disabilities. And first of all, that started in public buildings, but then it came to our banks, then it came to our schools, and now it comes to our offices around the world. Microsoft makes sure that all of our buildings around the world are accessible, but it started from people in certain industries doing it first and then driving it out. And that's what I'd like to say to you as this community. You are our builders. Get your first steps into the world of digital accessibility. Get excited by it. It is a cool space to work in. But look at the social impact that you can have in the products that you can build on a daily basis. People with disabilities are using your products. And I would ask you to kind of, take this as your as the opportunity to go and get your badge, get your Accessibility Fundamentals badge. Take this as an opportunity and promote your skill as you move forward. Thanks so much.